There are great arguments against Christianity, perhaps the biggest being the problem of divine hiddenness. If the Christian God is real, it fails to manifest in any kind of realistic way. If you ask a Christian, "How do you know Jesus is real, and what is your relationship like with him?" they most likely will not provide any reality-based answers, because in reality, their relationship with Jesus is just as imaginary for them as it would sound to you. In most cases, a Christian will simply say, "I know it is true," and testify to some kind of a religious experience. You see, we live in a world where there is no sufficient evidence for Jesus being a God-man who floated up into the clouds. So it is usually a take-my-word-for-it testimony. However, sharing these miracle experiences is problematic. They are simply attaching the name Jesus to any given miracle, ignoring that perhaps there may be a higher force that is likely to perform miracles for anybody, Christians, Muslims, or whoever else prays to a God. Just because you claim it is the name of your God who performed your miracle doesn't make it true. The other problem is that credible verification is never offered to make these miracle stories plausible to anybody outside of a Christian camp. Christians need something stronger than a personal testimony. So they have crafted 3 very prominent apologetics for those of us who are a little more skeptical or otherwise difficult to convince. Number 1, either Jesus was a lunatic or he was telling the truth. Number 2, why would the disciples die for a lie? And number 3, Old Testament prophecies were fulfilled by Jesus. Most Christians are unaware just how weak and falsifiable all 3 of these apologetics actually are. Let's take a closer look. Number 1, either Jesus was crazy or he was telling the truth. Which is more likely, a believer will ask? The entire problem with this question is that it puts the cart in front of the horse by assuming that the New Testament is historically accurate. We do not have any original New Testament text from the time of Jesus. Our earliest existing manuscripts all derive from many copies upon copies centuries later. Furthermore, Jesus never wrote down anything for himself. So even if we were to possess the originals, they would be legally categorized as hearsay. We have no way of knowing if the words of Jesus were invented by religious followers or altered through the years by oral tradition. It is also noteworthy that the New Testament was originally penned in Greek, which means the supposed words of Jesus, who spoke Aramaic, had to be translated, and then again from Greek to English. We are twice removed from the original language in which Jesus spoke when we are reading the King James Bible. Any time that you perform a translation, you will lose much of the proper perspectives, depth, and meaning to words. It is impossible to prove that Jesus spoke even one single word typed in red. This apologetic simply does not stack up when faced against reality. It is a desperate grasp for credibility. So too is the die for a lie apologetic, which brings me to number 2. Why would the apostles have died for a lie? This apologetic never ceases to baffle me every time I hear it used by a notable Christian speaker. The argument assumes that we know something about all of these apostles when we don't. There are no statues, no monuments, no burial places, no time of birth or death for the majority of these magical men. We have no genealogies, not even a trace of any family or descendants, almost as if they were completely fabricated characters. One of the great mysteries of early Christian history is that we know a lot about Paul, yet he is not a member of the 12 who walked with and knew Jesus. These 12 apostles should be some of the more famous people in humanity's history. We are told that they were handpicked by Jesus to take the gospel to the ends of the world and were endowed with great powers to perform wondrous miracles. If these 12 magical men were real historical figures, there should be a great deal known and written about them. The void is alarming. We certainly cannot jump to assuming any manner in which they died. This die for a lie apologetic, by and large, is made up completely out of thin air. The only apostle of the 12 mentioned in the New Testament to die as a martyr is James, son of Zebedee. Peter also has a credible historical reference to being a martyr. Peter's account is the most reliable. Ironically, in the two epistles claimed to have been written by Peter, there is no mention of him ever even seeing a resurrected Jesus. Such a profound experience in which he never speaks of. Regardless, even with a few likely cases, there remains a huge problem. These accounts fail to meet the die for a lie criteria. In order for somebody to actually die for a lie, a believer must be given a chance at death to recant his belief in trade for his life. Otherwise, they are only a martyr. Being a martyr is a very different situation from dying for a lie. There is no evidence that any apostles were provided with a unique opportunity to recant their belief in trade for their lives. As martyrs, these men could have been killed for any number of reasons. We could be missing information. There is no reason to assume they were killed for being Christian. We know not all Christians were being put to death. This just is not true. They could have been killed for committing a crime, or perhaps stirring up a rebellion, or protesting a political stand. The die for a lie apologetic fails to meet any of the standards for credibility in which they are claiming. Yet Christian speakers to this day use this apologetic as their best evidence for the resurrection story. We should seriously be asking why. This is the best they have? It certainly should not be so surprising, considering that people don't magically float up into the sky. Consider this. We don't even know the day that Jesus died or resurrected. How odd is that? The first Christian communities not only forgot the day of their most pinnacle and central event, they can't even pin down a year. The noonday sky turned to night, a great earthquake, and then Jesus rises from the dead and wanders around Jerusalem for 40 days before floating up into the clouds. And nobody bothers to mark on a calendar or commemorate any such events. Reality and history are screaming out to us how implausible these stories are. Yet, the apostles died for a lie. Therefore, it must be true. Perhaps we should examine just how common it is for people to become martyrs for a passionate belief. Jim Jones founded the People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ, in 1955. Jones and his faithful followers knowingly faked healings because it generated financial resources in which they used to set up soup kitchens for the poor. In February 1960, they had established social services, including rent assistance, job placement services, free canned goods, clothing, and coal for winter heating. It was a growing, compassionate, and giving community. Whoever joined up with Jones was promised a paradise free from the wickedness of the outside world. On the evening of November 18, 1978, Jones convinced his congregation that the apocalypse was upon them and ordered his followers to drink a concoction of cyanide-laced, grape-flavored Kool-Aid. Parents were instructed to inject their children with the same drink should they be under a certain age. In all, 918 people died, including 276 children. Parents were injecting their own children with a lethal poison in the very same year that Van Halen released its first album. In 1989, the year in which Michael Jackson was named the King of Pop, the world was also introduced to David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. The Davidians affirmed that David Koresh was God in the flesh. Koresh believed that he was the chosen lamb described in Revelation, and that he would unlock the 7 seals that contain the prophecies for the end times. The conviction of David's followers was so real to them that they followed Koresh to their death. 76 Davidians died willingly in a church raid, while only 35 voluntarily left during the standoff. The children's willingness to stay with Koresh disturbed negotiators, who were unprepared to work around such religious passion. Scholars who study apocalypticism tried to persuade the FBI that the siege tactics being used would only reinforce the Davidians that they were in a biblical end-of-times confrontation that had eternal significance. The scholars pointed out that to us, the beliefs appear to be extremely silly, but to the Davidians, these beliefs were extremely meaningful, and they were willing to die for them. In March of 1997, the year in which the Spice Girls released their first single, police found 39 bodies of the members of Heaven's Gate religious organization. Some were teenagers. The Heaven's Gate members followed cult leader Marshall Applewhite, Jesus reincarnated according to them, to their death. Applewhite had told them that if they would follow him into death, a UFO, following behind the Hale-Bopp comet, would come and take them to heaven. Either this man was crazy, or he was telling the truth. Which do you think is more likely? Most would agree this man was delusional, as he did have a history of mental instability. Yet he was so convinced, he not only died for his belief, but managed to convince 37 others to die with him. Clearly, we can agree on one fact. Being a martyr does not provide any proof or credibility to your beliefs. Religious movements can be very attractive to people, especially among the oppressed or poor, who can easily be taken advantage of psychologically. Ironically, the New Testament tells us that Jesus primarily kept company with the oppressed, downtrodden, and poor. Upon a cherished leader's death or execution, believers will often refuse to accept finality. Long after David Koresh's death, some of the Heaven's Gate survivors, such as the elder Clive Doyle, said they are still waiting for David's return. What's truly fascinating about our species is we will draw connections where there are none, and elevate stories with embellishments or even all-out fabrications. Such activities seem to fulfill our cravings and our imaginations. We are also prone to practicing herd mentality. No matter how silly a story might seem, the larger the number there is of people who believe it, the less crazy it will seem to others. Sam Harris once said, "The problem with religion, because it's been sheltered from criticism, is that it allows people to believe in masses what only idiots or lunatics could believe in isolation." In this video, I have covered two of the most popular apologetics used to try and provide credibility for the New Testament's fantastic magical tales. The third most commonly used apologetic is fulfillment prophecies. In video number 9, I will go into great detail to reveal how the fulfillment prophecies of Jesus are incorrect interpretations, textual alterations, and even lies. Is Jesus in Christian theology really found in the Old Testament? Jump over to video 9 to discover the reality. And stay strong and wise, my friends.
I don't believe in masquerades. I don't believe that you're okay. I don't believe that God will save. Only you can solve your problems. I don't care what they sold you. They are not here to hold you.